You're listening to School Counseling Simplified, a podcast with easy-to-implement strategies for busy school counselors. Here's your host, Rachel Davis from Bright Futures Counseling.
Hey listeners, let me let you in on a little secret. You don't have to stress about planning your class lessons, small groups, and individual sessions anymore. My school counseling membership program, Impact, is here to help. So, what do Impact members get? Monthly curriculum plans across all 3 tiers, SEL lessons, small groups, individual, and seasonal activities, step-by-step video implementation guides, bi-weekly Zoom coaching calls with me, and an exclusive Facebook group community. This membership is designed for school counselors who want to deliver the best possible content to their students, but who also want to just press the easy button. You'll get access to monthly curriculum plans, resources, support, and community so you can deliver quality, engaging, life-changing counseling lessons to your kiddos. So what do you think? Are you ready to make an impact? Join today at stressfreeschoolcounseling.com/impact. Hey guys, thanks for listening to another episode of School Counseling Simplified. So this week today, when you are hearing this, I am in Vegas at the ASCA conference. Follow me on Instagram at Bright Futures Counseling to see what we're up to. I'm going to try to be in my stories over there sharing all the things. And DM me if you are here because I would love to see you. I want to connect with you in person. That would just be so amazing. Maybe we can have like a little listener meetup. So this week, I want to talk to you some more about small groups because that is our focus this month. I love small groups. They're my absolute favorite. And doing them well is so important and so effective to your counseling program. And this week, I want to talk about that effectiveness and how to measure it. So we're going to talk about how you can use small group data to form your groups and to determine their effectiveness. So up first, how to use your small group data to form groups. So this is kind of like I mentioned in the last episode, but get a visual with me here. I want you to think of your tiers. So your tiers. So this is a triangle, and on the bottom tier, we have Tier 1 interventions. These are our class SEL lessons that we're giving to all students. These are completely preventative and proactive. Then we have Tier 2, that is our small group instruction. Some students, based on referrals, will be formed and you'll receive small group instruction from you. And then in the top tier, we have individual counseling. So these are our most high need students, and those are the students that need that one-on-one intervention. So we're talking about Tier 2 today, about those small groups. But we can look at previous data to see which students need more or less intervention and then form groups that way. So it's kind of like triaging our students and then moving them through the tiers. So based upon an initial referral, we'll decide what tier would be best for them, Tier 2 or Tier 3. So we can have parents indicate or teachers indicate on the referral if they think their child should do group or individual, but then we'll know what's best and based on their area of need and severity, and then we'll place them either in an individual session or in a group. Now, then what we can do is use data to assess how they're doing to determine the effectiveness, which I'll talk about in a second. And then based on the results of this data, we can decide if they're in the correct tier. So for example, if we have a student who is in an individual counseling and they've been meeting with us for 6 weeks, we've collected data, and based on the data, we can see that they have improved and they no longer need that Tier 3 level of intervention. They don't need that quite as intense counseling one-on-one. So what we can do is we can move them back down to level 2, which is the small group. So perhaps after they've graduated from their individual sessions, we'll comment on their progress, tell their parents, tell their teachers, wow, they're doing so great. We think they don't need as strict as a level of intervention as Tier 3, but we do think they would still benefit from something a little more than that class lesson, so let's put them in a small group. So we'll move them down the ladder, move them to Tier 2, thus forming a small group. Now, on the flip side, if we're seeing them for class lessons, we go in their class every month, but we notice that they need a little more than what we can offer in that general class lesson. They need a little more support. We'll move them up a tier through Tier 2. So think of it as a little triangle, as a ladder. You're moving them up and down the rungs based on the data. So we're not being random or willy-nilly about this. We're looking at the data and making calculated decisions based on the results. So that's how we can form small groups using data. Now, up next is how to determine the effectiveness of these groups. So I recommended in the last episode where we talked about, the basics of establishing and forming your small groups, a 6 to 8 week period. And there's a reason why we have an end date on these. Well, for one, we're not therapists doing ongoing intervention here. We have brief, solution-focused counseling. That's our role as the school counselor. So 6 to 8 weeks is my recommended amount of time. And the reason we do that is so we can measure the effectiveness. So after, the allotted amount of time, let's say 7 weeks, we'll pick one in the middle. So let's say after 7 weeks, you do your post-group data, you measure the results, and then you can see, hey, did the kids improve or not? Then this is what we're going to do with the data. If some of the kids improved, great, they can go back down to the class lessons. Now, if some of our kiddos did not improve, maybe they need another round in the group. If they, are really struggling, maybe we'll move them up to that tier 3. Maybe we'll move them up to that tier 3 individual intervention. But if we notice no one in the group did well, everyone was still struggling, no one learned our coping skills that we were trying to teach, then maybe the group's the problem. Maybe your curriculum's the problem. And that is okay. That information's super valuable. Now you can know, it's not the 1 or 2 kids who are struggling here. The whole group didn't progress. That means maybe the problems with the group curriculum, which I now need to revise. So this data is so powerful. So let's talk about 2 things here: the tools that we can use to determine the data, and then how we can deliver these tools. So there's 4 tools I want to share with you today. The first one is behavior progress monitoring forms. Fancy name, but it's super simple. These are basically some forms, and I have a template that I'll share with you in the show notes. You can click the link there to check them out. But basically you pick the area of need. So for example, anger management, and then let's say we have the pre-intervention survey and the post-intervention survey. You're going to send this form to parents and teachers and have them rate the student's behavior. So it's like on a scale of 1 to 4. The student, gets physical when angry. Never, seldom, almost always, always. Something like that. So then they rank that, you save that information, and then you're going to send the exact same form out at the end of the 7-week period and have the student or the parent and teacher complete it, and then you can compare. So this one is all about behaviors. You're looking at the behaviors and seeing how the student behaviors have changed. Now, it's great to get the perspective from both parents and teachers because you can see if these behaviors are changing at home, if they're the same at home as they're at school. That's always interesting data to see. So that's the first tool that I recommend. Second up, self-assessments. I love student self-assessments. So the first tool mentioned is for parents and teachers. This one you're giving to the students themselves. So I recommend doing this on a piece of paper and a Google form. I too have some great templates for these that I'll link to in the show notes. But the self-assessments you give to students at the beginning of the sessions and then at the end, and they get to reflect and share what they know. So it's like a pre-post test. So for example, a question could be, I can name 5, or I know 5 coping strategies to use when I feel angry. So maybe, I'm assuming at the beginning of the group they'll put no, maybe they don't know any, or maybe they only know 3. And then at the end of the group, hopefully they know more. You can even have them write in the number so you can see, quantitatively by how many they increased. So that is a student self-assessment, and that's a great way to determine the effectiveness of your group. Now, the third tool is an observation. So you can go into the classrooms and observe the students. So again, this will be a good way to measure behavior. So you can, do a few observations at the beginning of your sessions, throughout your sessions, and then at the end of the 7-week period, and see, hey, I can see that they're using the skill I taught them, or when presented with a situation where they would need their coping skill, they're still not using it. Observations are a great thing to do, and I feel like counselors, this one's kind of overlooked. I feel like we don't do nearly enough observations. I have a blog post all about student observations with some tips on how to implement them, so I will link to that in the show notes as well. Okay, up next, our fourth tool I want to mention is a survey. So this is really similar to that behavior progress monitoring form, the first tool that I mentioned, but the survey is more informal. It can even be done verbally, but you just want to make sure that you're jotting down the answers. But you can just check in with parents and teachers and just get a general, consensus. How's it going? Do you feel like they've improved? Yes, no, maybe, thumbs up, middle thumb, thumb down. It can be very basic, but these surveys are really helpful. You also can do them with the students themselves. Like I mentioned, the thumbs thing, just any kind of check-in. The more data, varying from formal to informal, but the more data you can collect, the better. So we want to measure the effectiveness of our groups to see, are the right students in the right groups, and then is the group material, presented in a way that's easy to understand and effective? Or do we need to switch it up? Okay, so those are the tools, but now let me tell you how to give the tools. So there's 3 ways here. First, paper forms. So just a good old-fashioned paper form, print it out, put it in the teacher's box, or send it home with the parents. With your permission slips, a great time to send them to get that pre-test data and say, hey, can you please fill this out about your child's behaviors and return it to me? Now, that does require some follow-up sometimes to get the forms back, and that is kind of a pain, but it's super important. And then you can also do a Google form. So I love Google Forms. They're free. They're totally simple. So do a digital Google form and, email it to parents or teachers. And with the self-assessments, you can have students themselves complete the Google Forms on like an iPad in your office. And I love the Google Forms because they're a great way to see it. Like if you click on the results tab, it groups all the answers together, and you can see pie charts and graphs and different things to see, like a really good visual. If you're a visual learner like myself, then you would love seeing the data from these. And you can later use that data at the end of the year to showcase in like an end of the year report or something. So that's why I love a digital Google form, and the turnaround time's better because, you have to put the paper forms in a box or send them home, or they get crumpled in the bottom of the backpack. You know how that is. For this digital Google form, you can just send the link, hopefully get the answers back quickly. Everyone usually has their phone on them and can quickly, answer the Google form. And lastly is in person. So of course those observations are going to be done in person, and then the surveys can be done in person. So, get scrappy with your data. Like if you're at, parent pickup, go in there and, at the car rider line and try to ask them, or if you see a teacher, I was going to say in the bathroom, but maybe that's a little personal. If you see them like in the lounge or in between classes, run over with your clipboard and get a few answers. Ideally you have the formal assessment tools completed, but having some verbal, stuff is better than nothing. So that's another way to use those tools. Okay, guys, that was kind of action-packed. I said a lot of stuff there. Hopefully you find this helpful. So again, there's 2 ways that you can use data, and that is to form your small groups by moving them up and down those ladder rungs of the tiers of intervention. And the second way to use small group data is to determine the effectiveness. And to determine that effectiveness, you can use those 4 tools and then those 3 different ways to implement the tools. That was a lot. If you want to see it visually, download my small group cheat sheet. I have this awesome freebie for you. I'll link to it in the show notes. Download that so you can follow along and make sure that you've got everything good to go for your back to school small groups. Okay, and again, if you're at ASCA, I hope I get to see you, and we'll chat next week. Bye, guys.
Thanks for listening to School Counseling Simplified. You can find the links from today's episode in the show notes. If you'd like to connect with Rachel, she's on Instagram and Teachers Pay Teachers at Bright Futures Counseling. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss any episodes of School Counseling Simplified. Talk to you next week.